Welcome to the VandySports podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest tonight is David Sisk. He is our basketball recruiting analyst at VandySports.com. This episode presented by Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We thank our co-presenting sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Our news presented by Sutherland and Belk, an SEC sports-loving injury firm in Nashville. These guys will shoot you straight on your rights and options. When you've been injured in an accident, call them at 615-846-6200 to get your questions answered. You can also visit them online at sbinjurylaw.com. Well, a big get for Coach Jerry Stackhouse and the men's basketball staff, Tyrin Lawrence, who is a guard from Sunrise Christian Academy, a combo guard at that, has committed to Vanderbilt. He is the number 139 player in the 2020 class and will be on campus next fall. The guest line presented by Bowling Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. Had no clue what I was missing until I got Bowling Branch sheets. They are fair trade certified, meaning they are made under safe conditions by men and women treated and paid fairly. Try them free for a month. You can return them, but you won't want to. Once you get the sheets, try the mattress. That was voted the best mattress of 2018. Go to bowlingbranch.com. That's spelled BOLL. Enter the promo code Vandy and get $50 off your first set of sheets. David Sisk is with us now. He covers hoops recruiting for us at VandySports.com. David, thank you for joining us. Lots going on with Vanderbilt recruiting, and we are thankful you are here to help us break that down.
Well, I'm glad you had me, Chris. It's been a while, but I understand, man. You really went places with a podcast, and you're bringing in the heavy hitters. So, but not today. I'm glad you could go back to the lightweights a little bit.
Well, you are not a lightweight. I'm just glad we have something positive to talk about because other than baseball, it's just been a never-ending stream of not so good stories. But one today, I think, with Vanderbilt landing the commitment of Kansas's, I guess he's actually from Georgia, Tyrin Lawrence. What is the significance of that? How good of a player do you think he can be?
Well, I think it's significant on two fronts. Number one, it gives you recruiting momentum, and this definitely does that. And I've tried to compare it to Bryce Drew's first class. You know, Bryce Drew's recruiting was much ballyhooed, really. And, you know, he brought in two top 150 players in his first year there. And in Jerry Stackhouse's first full year, he's brought in two top 150 players, along with Myles Stute out of the Washington, D.C. area. And actually, if you go back and look at Isaac McBride in the 2019 class that's transferring in from Kansas, that'd be three freshmen coming in next year who are top 150 in their respective classes. So I think there's something to be said for that. Like I said, I think a lot of Vanderbilt fans they needed something good to hear. And that certainly, like I said, helps build momentum. I think if you look at him as a player, I've talked to Corey Evans about this. And you've got to remember when Tyrin came out of high school, originally out of the state of Georgia, he was in the 2019 class, and all he had was mid-major offers. So he went the prep school route, went and played the post-grad team at Sunrise Christian.
Yep.
Right, Sunrise Christian Academy in Bel Air, Kansas. And, you know, they've got a great track record. That's really kind of turned in. I hate to put it this way because, you know, there's certainly more than that, but basketball-wise, it kind of really turned into a factory there. And, you know, it worked for him. He improved. People got to see him. And, you know, I talked to Corey Evans today, and I went back and watched tape. I've never seen him play live. And I know that Corey had said originally that from the time he saw him in Georgia to play with Sunrise, he's gotten a lot more athletic, and his words was a lot more bouncier. And I watched the tape of him this year, some of his games and action at Sunrise Christian. And, man, he really did look bouncy. He's about 6'4", just attacking the rim, playing over the rim. Had a decent-looking shot. I really couldn't tell. The reason I say decent, I couldn't tell how good because it was really hard to tell from the camera angle, but I like the way he holds his follow through. Ball looks like it's in a good spot. But I just kept having these thoughts that said, man, he kind of looks like Saban Lee a little bit. But I got to see Saban live, and obviously not Tyrin. So, I texted back and forth with Corey this afternoon, and I said, all right, fill me in just a little bit what you think. And he said, just electric first step and explosive around the rim. I said, correct me if I'm wrong. Do you see some Saban Lee in his game? And he said, actually, I do. He says probably a better playmaker, sets the table a little bit better, but he has some of that athletic ability to size 6'4", a bigger combo guard, and an explosive first step, plays over the rim. So, he could be a cut out of that mold.
Yeah, Saban is an interesting comparison. I don't know that that's who he reminds me of. I'm not sure who he reminds me of. I don't think he's as explosive a leaper as Saban is, although he's certainly fair in that category. But I do think what you said, I think he does have more of a knack for finding players. I think there's a little bit more natural point guard to him, whereas Saban, to me, was just this quick twitch, explosive, high-jumping athlete that really, even until this year, we weren't quite sure what he was as a player. So I can see some of the similarities, but I'm with you. I think it's not an exact comp for sure.
Right, and, it's a good comparison you made there, or actually a contrast. He has some of that. Saban was kind of in between positions.
Yeah.
And obviously, but Corey said he sets the table better. He wouldn't call him a point guard. He's Corey's adamant that he's a combo type. But if that's the case, he might lean more toward the one a little bit more. So he may have a little bit truer position. And, that's going to be welcome because you're looking at having somebody come in and spell Scottie Pippen at the ball handling spot some and kind of go in and out and give him a rest. And obviously you're building depth. And that's always a good thing.
He reminds me of something maybe, and I hate to say this because it's a highlight film, right? And we see the best. But from what I saw on there of his attributes, maybe something like a Jermaine Beal, probably with the better shot, but with a little bit more athleticism. That's kind of what was running through my head as I watched him.
Yeah, and you'll go back, and I think from guards from yesteryear, and be able to think of probably several guys or guys even on other teams. And you made a good point. So it was kind of a highlight film, and you have to be careful of those. But really, the thing that I kind of looked at was. Obviously, he finished around the rim so much, and it was obviously that he's got that knack, and he can get up. He can get off the ground, and I wanted to look at that shot, not necessarily whether or not it went in, but kind of look at the form a little bit. So like you say, you've got to be careful with highlight videos, but I think it gave us a little bit to look at.
Yeah, and when I watched his highlight, I thought at first he was pretty good at going to his right. I realized later when I watched the highlight film, some of the highlights were him dishing and not him shooting. The video was a little bit far away, and you weren't always sure who was who unless you had a good view of the number, which you always didn't. But I think the criticism of him is he's very left-handed, which I can see. And again, that's a highlight film. There may have been plenty of clips of his going to his right that we didn't see. But is there any thought that you've heard from people who have seen him play a lot as to that matter?
No, not really. And I'll be honest with you. I think if you can handle the ball, you can get out of that. I know, like working with high school kids, you take a kid that comes into high school and they're one-handed, and you can. A lot of times it's a creature of habit. They can go with the other hand, they just won't do it. And I think with him being able to go back to that other hand, I'll tell you something else too, Chris. In high school, sometimes, especially for athletic guys, they don't have to go back to that other hand. I mean, you could be a right-handed kid and come down and like Larry Bird used to, the old stories. He used to tell his defender, next time I'm going to get the ball, I'm going to take one dribble to the left, shoot a pull-up jumper, and you can't stop me. And that's what he'd do, and he'd score. And I think that's, kind of the case sometimes when guys come down to high school. They've been able to go with the ball wherever they want to do. So if they want to go left and they're left-handed, they'll go left, and the defense really doesn't get in their way. So, yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it. I think as far as ball handling goes, I think that can be corrected, because if they're good enough to handle the ball to get in college, I think they can get it to where they go with either hand. They just got to get in the habit of doing it.
Well, he's smooth and he's fluid and he's athletic, and that's a really good start towards picking up on being adept with that other hand.
Yeah. Like I say, I feel like I see no reason why he shouldn't have, let me put it that way, the ability to be able to go with both hands.
How sought a player was he? I know the final three were Cal and Ole Miss and Vanderbilt. It sounded to us like Ole Miss maybe was wanting a different position. I'm not going to say they backed off or jerked the offer, but you know how recruiting goes this late in the game. You don't have many spots, and sometimes it is a function of who's got room for you, which can cloud how good a player really is. I mean, he was ranked 139 and the rival was 150, which is probably the answer as to how good a player he is.
He might come up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, watching his attributes on film, which you have to be careful about, in terms of just the talent of what we saw, he looked legit to me in that regard.
I think this late in a recruiting season, and you got to remember, it's crazy right now with all the graduate transfers. I mean, I could. I think most schools are in a situation like Vanderbilt. They don't have a lot of spots left, and they're trying to make the decision of who they want to take. And sometimes it's first come, first serve. But I'll give you an example. And I think Cal was kind of in that place. But Ole Miss, Kermit Davis has probably offered more transfers. If you just get on Twitter and look, Chris Lee transferring from whatever school, his suitors are, and you start naming off schools, and I guarantee you Ole Miss is going to be in the middle of it. There's no telling how many transfers that they've contacted, for one, and secondly, that they've been pretty serious with. So I think this was kind of a situation. I think they wanted maybe a bigger wing. It was something they were looking at, but I think there were about 6 or 7 players that they were very serious about. I think Tyrin was one of them, and I believe it was kind of a first come, first served deal. And I think if you're Tyrin and you look at it, you're probably thinking, Vanderbilt probably wants me a little bit more than Ole Miss does. It didn't mean that Ole Miss wanted him any less, but it was just he was one of 6 or 7 guys. So I think if you're Jerry Stackhouse, you can look at him and say, hey, you're in a very small group of kids that we're going after here at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, from what I know, I don't see any downside or anything other than they got a good player. I think that's end of story there, and a guy who they really need. I mean, they need a little bit of everything right now. The rest of the class, to me, boy, there are a lot of ranges of possibilities with some of these kids. Let's start with Myles Stute. I think we've called him Stute. I was listening to his video on the audio of the other day, and the PA guys were calling him Myles Stute. So I guess that's the correct pronunciation. The takes on him are all over the board. I've had a couple of people that tell me they hear he's a mid-major player. His numbers at Gonzaga Prep this year weren't very good. Now, he's playing against outstanding competition and with several other good teammates, and so it's important that we don't lose context. But he averaged 10 points a game. To me, he looked like kind of a garbage man a little bit inside with a bit of a three-point stroke. Hard to tell how efficient he was because, again, we saw the makes, but I thought his stroke looked good. On the other hand, Corey Evans has really liked him. He's seen him a lot. I think we trust Corey's judgment. The other complicating factor with Myles Stute, David, is the fact that he was transitioning from more of a power forward role to a small forward role. So you've got to take that into account too. But how do you size him up as a prospect for Vanderbilt?
And I think that's a big part. If you look at him, you would think, especially with his weight, you would think, okay, this is a power forward. And that's what I thought when really they first got in pretty heavily on him. But like you said, and that's a key point, he was making the transition really from a power forward to a small forward and moving his game out on the floor. So that's one thing. That takes a little bit of time. But the other thing, and his high school coach was really adamant about this, is he said Myles had taken the role of really a kind of a role player that we had given him, and it wasn't necessarily his game. He said, but he accepted that role, and he was more of a leader, and what they needed him more for was the defense, was the rebounding, I think maybe to set the table a little bit offensively. They had scores on the team, and I think, in his senior season, he kind of took the back seat. He knew he'd already signed his scholarship. He didn't have to go out and prove to colleges what he could do, and he was all in on his high school team. And so sometimes I know we can get caught up in numbers, but Corey and his high school coach both, they don't seem to think that that's something to worry about. Like you say, Corey says changing positions, he can shoot the ball out there, and the Gonzaga prep coach really did not put him in a position where, he wanted him to score. He wanted him to do other things.
How legit do you think the listed offers were?
Hey, Chris, can I add this too? Let me add this too. Sometimes we look at this stuff, and I know, for example, and I'm going to go ahead and admit I was on the EYBL circuit, and I didn't think that he had a snowball's chance of being able to contribute anything. And I thought he was too heavy at the wing position. I just didn't think he could move well enough. And I've made that statement on the Vanderbilt boards before, and our readers know that. There'll be people that's listening to this say, yeah, he said that. So, and I'll be the first one to admit I was wrong. He was much better last year than I'd ever thought. He's just going to get better. Grant Williams was kind of like that. Guys, you're looking at guys in that 6'6", 6'7" range, and they're changing spots and they're changing their body a little bit. So, I've been wrong enough on guys like that, to sell Myles Stute short, because I just think that's a hard size and a hard frame and a hard position to handicap.
Well, you weren't the only one. As I pointed out, opinions on him have been really mixed. The other thing I'm wondering about was the offer sheet. There's been some questions about that. It was a good-looking offer sheet, but I know that he committed to Vanderbilt before visiting an official that he had lined up to Florida, which I guess begs some questions as to whether that offer was still on the table. What do you think in terms of what his offers really were near the end?
Now, are you talking about Myles?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I would have to. I'm actually driving in a car right now. I would have to go back and look at those. But I know this. I know that he was really impressed with a visit. If you go back and look at his family structure, and I know his high school coach talked a lot about that. His dad is an attorney in Washington, D.C., and I even think he was maybe involved, and I may be wrong here, maybe involved in sports agency a little bit. But if you go read the bios of his parents and his family, I mean, they are top of the line. And I think he was one of those kids, not only with him, but his family. They knew what they wanted, not just from a basketball program, but from a school, from that school's environment. And I think they got to Vanderbilt and were just like, hey, this is what I want. There was a lot more to it than basketball with Myles. And I just think if he would have been one of those kids and he would have ended up with a Kentucky and a Kansas offer, and he had all those on the table, he would have visited Vanderbilt and he would have committed while he was there, because he's just, people don't like maybe the term Vanderbilt type, and I use that loosely, but man, I'm going to tell you, you talk about a well-rounded kid with a well-rounded family. Very impressive.
Well, you mentioned some important things because fit's a big deal. I look back at Kevin Stallings, and most of his career, he was great about recruiting kids who weren't McDonald's All-Americans, but fit at Vanderbilt, could do what he wanted to do, came from good backgrounds, would do the work in the classroom, those sorts of things. I hear a lot of commonality in what you're saying and the kinds of kids that won for Kevin at Vanderbilt. Where Kevin got in trouble was about 10 years ago when I think he laxed off in recruiting, and they started bringing in kids who had some off-court issues, maybe weren't great students. So I think that's an important fit. That and being ready for the competition level and the challenge. I mean, I think a lot of it is maturity and those sorts of things, and being ready for kids who are better than you. It sounds like, with everything you're saying, that the intangibles, from what we know, would suggest a lot of positive things in that regard.
Yeah, and I would say this too. When I say Vanderbilt type of kid, I think it gets misconstrued sometimes that the kid is selling themselves to Vanderbilt in a way that, hey, this is the kind of kid that we're looking for. But I think in this case, and I think it's probably more importantly, that I think a lot of times Vanderbilt has to sell itself to that kid and that family, because I think probably the Studies looked at this and said, okay, there's going to be a certain type of school and program that we're looking for, and we've got to find that fit, if that makes sense. And I think it's more, Vanderbilt being the Studies type of school and program than him being the Vanderbilt type of kid. And I'll say one other thing too. I think Jerry Stackhouse is trying to surround himself with players with tough kids, tough-minded kids. That's the thing I see a lot of these. There's not a whole lot of finesse ones coming in, or he's associating himself with who are not, you don't hear the term hard-nosed or all that. And that's the one thing I think that stuck out. I mean, we already knew that Myles was a tough-minded type of player, but then, in high school, he just sells it out and does the little things, getting loose balls and doing all the things that don't show up in the score sheet. So I think, that's the thing that really is attractive to Jerry Stackhouse too. He is going to have tough kids in his program.
What in the world do you make of Isaac McBride?
I don't know yet. From what we understand, he's going to enroll. It's hard to say from Kansas. You're there 1 week and you leave. I have heard that that when he got there, that he was. I think he was at a Christian school, and he was. Bill Self was a little bit too demonstrative for him, and he didn't handle that well, and he got out. So I'm interested. I don't know. I have heard, you players that we talked about. I've kind of heard the same way with Isaac. I've heard some people say that, that the rating systems missed the ball on him, that they had him ranked higher than he should have been. I don't know enough about that yet. We're going to see. He had good high school numbers, but I want to see how he fits in, and if what I have heard is the case, is he tough enough to take the coaching of Jerry Stackhouse?
Well, he, on one hand, was the Gatorade Player of the Year in Arkansas. On the other hand, he played at a small school, but then he lit up the AAU circuit and blew up, and that's how he got on Kansas's radar. But then on the rebound, Arkansas, which had openings at the time, I believe, did not offer him a scholarship. I think he might have visited or had talked about visited, but ultimately they passed. So there's just mixed signals all over the place on that one. And plus, I think the worry that I'm not 100% sure he's been admitted to school yet either.
Eric Bossy told me that, and he didn't tell me any of this other stuff, but when we asked about players that they were kind of looking at, and let's say just Isaac being at Kansas, he said one thing. He said there's not a better talent evaluator in college basketball than Bill Self. Bill Self very rarely misses. So that, and he was good enough to to get offered at Kansas. So you get offered at Kansas, I mean, nobody's going to confuse his basketball talent with mine. So all this remains to be seen. Obviously not played last year. There's just a lot of variables here that'll have to work their way out.
Yeah, I think that one is a complete wild card. Now, the other thing, too, their recruiting class, so to speak, I don't know if you want to count them for last year or this year or what. It really does not matter. But they got 2 transfers coming in. Quentin Malloy-Brown, I hear, is an okay player. I don't think he's a difference maker. Was pretty efficient at Rice in Conference USA, and I always liked that kind of player. DJ Harvey, a kid who was a top 50 recruit or maybe borderline top 50 recruit, maybe just outside out of high school, went to Notre Dame, played 2 years, I think started one, did not have great efficiency numbers, and that wasn't a very good team either. But a year away from the game, I think he is a hard-nosed defensive type player that Jerry loves. At least it seems like that's the case. So that's another one where I'm really interested to see what they are getting in him.
Yeah, and I think Quentin's going to add post depth, and you can't ever have enough of that. And I mean, they're just one injury. I mean, look at last year. You're one play away from being down to really one post player. And I think Educate probably played better than what we expected. So obviously, they need to add players there and need to add depth. So I think, you average 10 points a game as a freshman and at Rice. Yeah, I think you could come in and do some things. I don't know if you're going to set the league on fire, but like I said, I think you can add some depth to that spot. I'm excited about DJ Harvey. I knew that name from when he was in high school and watched him some at Notre Dame. They needed bigger wings, especially with Aaron Neesmith out. I mean, if you look at the way the roster's kind of stacked, and that's one place where Myles could come in too. He can play that 3-4 slash maybe a little bit. They need bigger wings, but DJ, that's what they needed because let's say everybody came back and everybody got enrolled. So you're looking at guys in between that 6'4" and 6 foot range, as Isaac McBride, as Scottie Pippen, as Saban Lee, as Max Evans, as Tyrin Lawrence. So they're kind of top heavy. They're still in on Kerwin Walton. So, they're kind of top heavy on that side. So they need some bigger perimeter players. And you mentioned defense. I think that's important because you've got to be able to match up with there's a lot of 6'6" wings in the Southeastern Conference. You got to have some guys out there who can guard them. And I had a high school coach tell me one time, we were talking about players just being able to guard different positions and play different positions and the way it is now. And you look for versatility. And he says, you are who you can guard.
Yeah, and the plan for Jerry, of course, was to build around defense, and it didn't happen. But that wasn't necessarily his fault either. You play the hand you're dealt.
Yeah. So but he was saying if you play, you're supposed to guard anybody or play any position from a 2 through a 4, and you can't guard a power forward. Well, guess what? You're not a power forward. So
right.
I think having him and that mindset, that defensive mindset in a bigger wing frame is something that they're going to need. I think that's a very important part for next year.
I think we've all presumed they are getting Cleavon Brown back yet, but have you heard anything there?
No, I haven't, but here's what I think. Now, I don't have anything concrete to go on here, And I could have somebody that knows could call me up tonight and say, that's the biggest crock I've ever heard at what you said. But uh, I kind of think that he could have come back and played, but he had that ninth game in. They did not want to do anything, I believe, that far in to, they give him a complete senior year and do anything to damage a red shirt. One thing I was going to say, and I wish I could remember the player's name, but I saw it on the ESPN ticker today. He was in the same situation. He played 7 games last year. He got injured, and the NCAA granted him another year of eligibility to come back and play next year. Here's the interesting part. It's got to do with Cleveland. He had already redshirted a year, so this was his 6th year coming up. So he had played 7 games. He was looking at a red shirt because of an injury. So now, he's going, it's very similar to what Cleveland, is going with. He's going into his, he played 9 games. He's going into his 6th year. So they've shown that they will give, if this is a precedent, they will give a red shirt to a player who's injured to come back for a 6th year. I thought that was very positive.
Well, I don't think that's the question because I believe he meets all the criteria. It's 30% of the games. He played 9 out of 31, which is just a hair under that. I think it's just, did he make the decision to come back? And I heard conflicting things all year, but to me, when they didn't have a senior day for him and he didn't play anymore this year, that was probably, I'm not going to say the tell because I don't know, but that suggests to me that he is back next year.
Yeah, and they could use him. And Chris, you're probably like me, and a lot of the fans were, a lot of people out there listening. You watched Vanderbilt play last year, and they had all these close games and games that they almost won. And I wasn't even thinking about, man, if we'd have had Aaron Neesmith that had won a game, I was thinking, gosh, they'd have had Cleveland Brown. They could have pulled that one off. And, there's probably 3 or 4 games like that. And I think he's by far their best post player. And it's, guys who are good inside players, hard to come by. So I think would be a great win-win situation for Jerry Stackhouse and Vanderbilt, if he comes back.
Well, and the other thing, too, the league called a disproportionate number of fouls last year compared to the other leagues. Of course, the guys that usually get called for more fouls are bigs. Missing a big in that spot was just really bad timing.
Yeah, and you get into those calls. I watched, I do some work for the Minnesota side, too, and, watching those Big Ten games and the difference in officiating in this SEC and the Big Ten. I mean, the Big Ten, they're just mauling each other in the paint. They let them play, and they very rarely foul out. I mean, you'll watch a half and a halftime, and one team's got 4 fouls called on them, or one team's got 5, and heck, you get an SEC, I've got the first 3 minutes. So, to me, and I guess it's a whole different subject, but officiating in the SEC gets pretty frustrating at times.
Yeah, I saw teams in the bonus before a half was over more than once this year. But let's go to the mailbag because there's a lot of questions here that need to be answered. Our mailbag is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. If you need home, auto, motorcycle, renters, landlord, life, or commercial insurance, Josh can help you out. Call him at 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at jdmintonhq. He is my insurance agent. Try him out, and I think you'll like what you get. Okay, Mr. Vandy says, who do you think Vanderbilt has the best shot of getting to sign during the spring and will be a transfer or an incoming freshman? I think that means after what went down today. So who is the best prospect that they have a chance with right now, whether that be a freshman or a high school or a prep school recruit?
I'd say right now Kerwin Walton. And I don't know, honestly, what this does in his recruitment. Kerwin is about 6'5", elite shooter out of Minneapolis, and he is, like I said, an elite shooter. But I think Vanderbilt was looking at him as a point guard, and I don't know where the Tyrin Lawrence thing. I don't know if they say, "Hey, there's room for both. We want both guys." I really don't know. And in his recruitment, anyway, nobody is sure where he's going to go. I talked to a lot of people on that, and nobody. The only person that knows for sure it was a coach and a high school coach up there, and he said, "I don't think he knows what he wants to do." And even anybody around that city that you talk to, AAU coaches, friends, people that know him, they have no idea. So that doesn't mean before this that Vanderbilt would have gotten him. He's down to 6 schools that he's announced: Creighton, Arizona, North Carolina, Minnesota, Vanderbilt, and there's somebody else.
Georgetown.
He knows who has been in the lead, or if anybody is even in the lead right now. The other guy would be William Jeffers Jr. out of Erie, Pennsylvania, power forward. He's going to announce soon. In fact, I saw that on Twitter today. I've not been able to get in touch with him. I've been trying to get his father, but he was kind of in a boat, like Tyrin. He was going to take a spring official to Vanderbilt before all this happened. So he's kind of a sight unseen guy. Pitt's pretty much the kind of the hometown school there. So Vanderbilt may have to overcome that. So I don't know. I mean, there's guys that they have shots at, but the way things are falling right now, I don't know if there's an individual that they're in the lead for as far as transfers and all that goes. I don't know of anybody, and there may be some out there. I've got to check through that and to see now if there's somebody that they're really, really serious on. They've reached out to a guy or two, but I haven't heard about them being in the lead for anybody.
Harley Hog 44 says, what are you hearing from recruits on the process in which Jerry Stackhouse is reaching out to them?
What do you mean by the process? What do you think he means there?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe means volume. I don't know. All I can go by lately is Lawrence said that they'd been talking to him a lot, which is kind of a change from the way they were earlier. That's been the knock that everybody knows. So,
well, I know they're doing like now, and I'll approach this from one or two angles. If you're talking about, with Corona and all that, I think they've been doing like a lot of college programs. They've had to adjust. They've been doing a lot more texting, a lot more phone calls. Obviously, you can't do the visits. They're doing the virtual tours now. So, I think the coaches they'll go to FaceTime or whatever, and they'll hop in the golf cart. And they'll give the campus tour, walking around the buildings or driving around in the golf cart, giving just a virtual tour over the phone. So I think that's one thing. And obviously it's worked well. And now that I think about it with that question, it's probably a good time to ask that, because Tyrin Lawrence, signed Vanderbilt sight unseen. He did not take an official visit. He was like Jeffers. In fact, he did not take an official visit to Ole Miss or Vanderbilt, either one. They were both to Cal. So that's big. Without him ever setting a foot on campus. So that's big. One other thing, too, I think they, early on, there were so many West Coast kids that they're going after, and they still do that. But I think they've started to balance that out as, the entire staff's kind of got a feel for this area. They've been here over a year now. So you're seeing more East Coast offers, guys that are recruiting pretty heavily down in Georgia, things like that. So I think the geography aspect of it's kind of evened out as well.
Well, the situation there, David Grace is the only one of the 3 assistants who has recruited before, and his ties are mostly on the West Coast. To which I'll ask you this question from Vandy 1995. Gray seems to be the only assistant on the road. Who on that staff would you say is the number 2 recruiter?
Wow, man, that's tough right now to say because nobody's on the road. And you don't know if you get through the first year and through it, if there ever going to be some different assignments or anything. I know for Roger Phillip, so he's been a lead recruiter on some of these kids. He's been in on some of those hard. So that would have to be my guess too. Andy Fox is the recruiting coordinator, and he's putting in good work too. But if I had to pick that next guy, it would probably be Faraji. But I know this. You and I have talked about this. Jerry Stackhouse is big about it being a team effort and not coming down to an individual recruiter or an individual assistant coach. So, he kind of frowns on that. So, he wants it to be considered, a group effort. And that, like I said, that's really what I think. I think that got a lot of people involved.
Next question, thoughts on what Jerry Stackhouse needs to do to get the commits they need to turn the program around?
I think one thing, Chris, and you've been big on this, I think the school and athletic departments, well, not necessarily athletic department, I think it's got to come from the top of the school. I think there's some commitments that they've got to make. I think eventually it comes down to where, what you've got to offer as far as facilities and things like that are a big situation. And I think over time, like I said, if you look right now, if you want to count the transfer from Kansas in right now, there's 3 kids that are all top 150 kids and 3 that he signed. I don't think you can look at last year's freshmen that he brought in. They just had to fill a roster quickly. They were desperate. So, they put a dent in it this year. I think next year, he's had 2 full years. That's going to be interesting to see who all he can bring in that class. But, and I know you've had, I would say, another subject for another day. I know you spent a lot of days on this one, Chris, but I think investment from the university into the basketball program is probably what needs to be done more than anything.
Yeah, good luck with that one. Well, and I think on his end, look, he had no idea what he was doing when he came in, right? He missed the spring recruiting period or a lot of it because he didn't know any better. I think the way that he put his staff together was ill-conceived because of what he knows is the pros, and you go with what you know. The thing to me that's interesting is he could turn this around. He's just going to have to figure out what it takes to be a college coach. That means you're going to be out on the road more than you probably want to be. I just honestly don't think that that's his favorite thing to do. I don't think it's pounding the pavement and calling kids and those things. So to me, it's not a question of does he have the ability. It's what does he want to do? Does he want to stick this out? And if so, is he willing to do those things, or is he more interested in leading kind of the pro lifestyle, which is a lot different? So again, look, I think the encouraging thing is he is bringing some talented kids in, which points to some ability to close. But it's like anybody else. We tend to do the things we want to do and not do the things we don't want to do. So I think it's just making up his mind about, is this really what I want to be long term is in college coaching? And if so, how willing am I to pound the pavement to do that?
That's always been not only just with him, but with college coaches in general that come out of the NBA. You've had, you think about them, really good players that have, Clyde Drexler, Larry Kustodiak, Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullen. The list goes on and on of NBA players who were exceptional NBA players who made tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars going into, the grind of all grinds, coaching college sports. You're talking 16, 18 hours a day. And the thing is, they don't have to do that. they could walk away from whatever school they're at, never have to work another day in their life. So taking on that grind is an issue, for individuals like that. It's got to be. And I'm not even just saying that about Jerry Stackhouse. I'm saying that's been the overall view of any ex-NBA player comes into college coaching.
Well, and I think he's worth, someone told me something along the lines of $60 million too. So there's also that. If it's something you don't enjoy, it's not like he doesn't have other options, whether that's pro or just saying, hey, forget this, I'll go play golf and enjoy my life that way. I guess that's the point I've tried to make all along is it just doesn't seem like that's what he's wanted to be. His eye's always been on the pros. So I think the next year is going to be critical for him just to make some decisions. And look, maybe he gets out and decides he likes it and he's fine with it. But I think that's the question that everybody's had. I think you and I both have talked to enough people to know we're not talking idly on that topic.
Right. And that's something we'll see. It seemed like the players were bought in last year. They kept playing through adversity, and I thought that was a good sign. Now we're going to see what happens as far as how rosters go and how the team does next year and how you recruit. So I think like anything else, I get asked all the time, let's say somebody gets hired at whatever school. I'm trying to think. There weren't many coaches that got fired this year at all, but it'd be like, let's say last year, let's say Eric Musselman comes in Arkansas and somebody would say, is that a good hire? And I would be like, I don't know. Ask him again 4 years. And I think that's the case for a lot. There's so many variables and so many question marks and so many close calls and what ifs that, it takes time. Sometimes things look like home runs and they're not. And other times it looked like something wouldn't work. I mean, how many people have you heard say in the media rather say, hey, boy, I really had Ed Orgeron pegged wrong, so it can go either way. I think that's in every sport and in every program.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be clear. I think that too. I think with Jerry, he's a competitive guy. He's done well for himself in life. I think everything you just said in terms of him playing hard is valid. I think that he developed players last year too. And I think that was a good sign, particularly what he did with Pippen and Lee and Neesmith before he got hurt. So I think a lot of the tools are there. It's just how the rest of it comes together, and we've hit all that by now. Here's another one, and I'm sorry I don't have the name of the questioner here. He says, is it out there that Jerry Stackhouse may not be around after a year or two, and is that affecting the recruiting process?
No, I'm not. I honestly, I have not heard that from anywhere, and I don't think that's out. I don't think there's even any schools negatively recruiting that way. So I'll have to give a quick and emphatic no on that one.
Well, he's got a 6-year deal, and I think he's making around $3 million a year. So to me, it's what other opportunities come up probably, or just does he decide he wants to do it or not?
And here's the thing, too. Here's what you got to remember. And I think it's the same as a lot of places in college sports. I think there's a select few that doesn't have to worry about it. But if you win, then you're going to be looked at for higher. Where wins, he goes to South Carolina, and Tommy Tuberville wins at Ole Miss, and he goes to Auburn. And it's just you have that. If you don't have success, you don't make it, and then if you do have success, then there's always a chance of moving up to what might be perceived as a more high-profile job. A lot of times that's in college, and it may be in the NBA. So I don't think that's I just don't think that's different than what a lot of teams face. Or programs face. The only difference is that, it's probably a little higher profile with Jerry Stackhouse because, whether he wants it or not, I guess the NBA is going to be linked around that name because up to the last 2 years, he's been he's been an NBA lifer.
Yeah. I mean,
that's no fault of his own. I don't think
your experience is what you know.
At all.
Well, and I look back on his staff and the way he put it together. I don't fault him as much for that as I do Vanderbilt for not having anybody there to help him out and say, hey, here's the spring recruiting period, and that's important. If you miss it, you've only got X amount of dates. It's like, where was the guidance inside that university from anybody else to help him out on that stuff and say, hey, man, this is how you need to do it if you're going to have success here?
Right. And like I said, there's a lot of things in the athletic programs and teams, at Vanderbilt that if they've not worked perfectly or not worked the way you want, success-wise or administration-wise, how things are set up, I just think there's a lot of times you can't blame the coaches. I think they've had to overcome certain things that have not been there that they need.
Well, the thing is, if you want to really have a chance of success, there's two guys that have killed it there. One's Tim Corbin, the other's James Franklin. Neither of them missed a trick. Both of them were all in on development and all in on recruiting. So that's point number one, is you've got to do that. You've got to be very organized. You can't miss anything. And I think Kevin Stallings is kind of the next guy because I think Kevin worked pretty hard on recruiting for the most part. I think Kevin was very smart and organized and knew how he wanted to run his program. For the other, Kevin's personality is what got in the way, which you might be able to say that to some degree about James, or at least it might have in the long run, but it never affected winning and losing. I think if you get a great coach, they can win here without much from the university because we've seen it. But I think that's also where you run the risk if you get a great coach. The school traditionally has done very little to step up and keep him. I guess you can make Stallings as the exception, but Kevin never succeeded on the level of those guys either.
Right, and I wouldn't, any of those names that you mentioned that were really successful coaches too here, they didn't come across to me as yes men either. I mean, they had their own plan that that I think they knew from day one how they wanted to implement it, and it was going to be that way.
Oh, no doubt about that. I saw that up and close with both of them, and particularly in Tim. Jor King says, do you think Stackhouse's recruiting strategy is evolving?
Yes. Yeah. I don't think there's any doubt about that. As he gets more experience and, he had to get acclimated and he'd been some in the AA, he'd been involved in AAU, but, I don't think to the extent that he knew all the players were out there everywhere. And I just think evolving into this region, number one, but I'll also give you another example. I remember when Bryce Drew, the first spring that they were out, and they were all college coaches, but not at Division I. They'd all been mid-major at Valpo. And I remember Jake Diebler telling me, he said, here I am, we go that spring and we're kind of looking at kids and trying to, Kyle Young, who's the power forward, ended up going to Ohio State. And he said, here I am sitting here watching him play. And, I said, I'm sitting in between and Tom Izzo, recruiting him had a relationship with him for 3 or 4 years, and here I am, right off the bat coming down trying to catch up with that in 3 or 4 days. And he said, you just can't do it. And I think that is the case too. That's why I always said 2021 was where I really think you could tell how well they recruit, because then they've had 2 years to build relationships with these players. It may sound like this year, like, you've been there a year, that's plenty of time. And building relationships, it's not. If you've got a kid that was offered by a school when they was a sophomore, and that's when programs started to recruit them, and you've only had a year, I mean, you're still behind the 8 ball a little bit.
Well, I'll give him this. I think that Bryce and that staff, they're process and ethic about how they got after it in recruiting was easily superior to this one's. But at the same time, I think a year in, I think that so far Jerry's brought in better players.
Yeah, I believe so too. And I go back to that, that first class that they had. It was Ejike Obinna, it was Saban Lee, and it was Max Evans. And, Max fell just right out of that top 150, and Ejike was in it, but I don't believe he was a top 150 player. So, I think this class, to what he's done so far, matches up very well with what Bryce did in his first one.
Well, and where I wonder if he will change, okay, because I think, in fairness to him, a lot of his thought was we will get transfers. Well, if we heard the last staff complain about that once, we heard it 1,000 times about how hard they were to get in. I am wondering if his experience in his first calendar year on the job will change his approach.
I think maybe as far as grad transfers go, that was more of an issue in transfers, because when you got into the grad transfer thing, a lot what you had to be able to do in the Southeastern Conference was you had to offer a major to these players that the other school didn't offer. So in other words, it had to halfway look like an academic issue, where it's like, hey, the reason I'm going from school A to school B is because, I want to get in grad school, and school A didn't have my major. So, that's really what that was kind of set up around. Of course, that's nowhere near the reason now that it's used for. But anyway, you look at that, and Vanderbilt didn't have nearly as many majors as a lot of bigger public schools. So they had trouble getting the players in. I think you're looking at 2 transfers coming in next year. I think they'll add more transfers that will be ready for the 2021-22 season. And I think a lot of times that's kind of the way, a lot of times you have to set things up. I mean, if you were to look at the year Gonzaga played North Carolina in the finals, they played South Carolina in the Final Four. I mean, that whole game between Gonzaga and South Carolina was made up of international players and transfers. And I just call it creative recruiting. And I think even more, you've got over 1,000 transfers this year. I mean, it's just the transfer portals went nuts. So you've got that opportunity to bring in kids like that. So I think you're going to have more. And I think you've got to find a way too for, if you're going to be successful, for your roster to get old and to have 20, 21, 22-year-old kids on it, and transfers, are a way to do that. So I definitely expect them to keep looking in that direction.
Well, I think it's a great approach if you can make it work, okay? Because a kid who's 21 years old has been through college, knows what that's like. You see, I'll give you an example. You may not remember this kid, but Chris Williams in football was a really smart kid. I think he was going to major in engineering, but Chris didn't understand the work that went along with Vanderbilt, and Chris didn't play till his 3rd year on campus for that reason. Now, went on to become a first-round pick, but intelligence was never the question. It was the maturity and the being ready to handle that. So I think from that standpoint, transfers are a good strategy then. For the problem, though, is admissions. And I think that's where I'm wondering if that changes him. It's not just being able to get them in school, and God help him if he tries to get a grad transfer, but it's the thing that we always heard about is like we can't even get quick answers. The cycle on transfers, David, you know this. Man, these guys hit the market, and a week or two later, they've decided on a school. Well, it takes them 3 weeks to get answers most of the time. Yeah.
And that's what I always heard from a Jake Diebler and guys like that in Bryce's staff was the problem. He said, let's say we go recruit a player and we go to AAU tournament, and you'll have an EYBL tournament. Let's say they go to Indianapolis and it's the first one of the spring, and they see 10 guys that they like. Well, those tournaments normally would start, if not next weekend, in 2 weeks under normal circumstances. So you start seeing offers rolling out on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, just by the dozens, and you would see Vanderbilt hadn't offered anybody. And, Missouri might have offered 7 or 8 players, and Ole Miss might have offered 10 players. Well, the thing was, you were looking at a 3 to 4 week process, just administrations going through to see if they could accept these prospects. So, like you say, that is something. It's delayed, and they're fighting the time battle. The other thing too, I think on the other end of it, and I do think this staff has caught on to it, is you can't really miss on players when you sign them. It's not like you can afford to be wrong on 2 or 3 of them, because the Vanderbilt degree holds so much sway that kids are not going to leave. You have a kid, very few by their sophomore year, and it doesn't work out, well, I'm going to go somewhere else. They're thinking, hey, I'm a year away, 2 years away from getting a degree at Vanderbilt. And, we've seen that before, and I don't want to name names, but you can probably name 2 or 3 off the top of your head in the last 3 years that you couldn't run them off with a stick, because there's no way they were going to pass up getting that degree. So, you can't be wrong on misevaluating players either.
Yeah, I could not agree with that more. I go back and I look at the biggest mistake I think he made his first year, and it might not have mattered because Ohio State's home for him, but man, I would have just, if I'm him, I'm practically holding Jake Diebler hostage to not get him to leave.
Yeah, but I said that the year before, or the not the year before, but the administration before, coaching administration with Adam Cohen. I really wanted to see him keep him off Coach Stallings' staff when Bryce came in, but it worked out well because he he's from Ohio, and he had a chance to go to Ohio State, and I think he would have taken that at any opportunity. And Roger Powell also went to Gonzaga, so that those opportunities they had, especially with Jake to stay, I don't know that he would have stayed even if he'd been offered.
Vandy Fan 96 says, do you think there will be adjustments / downsizing to Coach Jerry Stackhouse's staff?
No idea. And it's even harder to say now because of everything with the coronavirus. And I know this. Watching, college sports shows, talks of Paul Feinbaum, for example, they were talking about the changes that you would see in college sports in general. They think there's going to be just a general downsizing to college staffs. And they say, like, for example, if you're the University of Alabama football, instead of 8 people working in the sports nutrition, you may have 4 or 5. Instead of 8 to 10 people in the weight conditioning program, you may have 4 or 5. So they tend to the college athletic programs are going to lose tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions. There was a Big Ten program, I'm trying to remember which one it was, but I saw yesterday where they said that they were going to lose $70 million. It might have been Minnesota that they were planning on looking right out, just initially here at losing $70 million out of their budget. So I don't know if it will affect that end of it at Vanderbilt, but I would think that with all this, what you're going to be, donors, boosters, they're probably looking at their pockets right now, and the economy. I don't think scenario, it's going to be good. So I just think there's a lot of water going under that bridge, but I would think just across the boards in college athletics, you're going to see some cuts, if not slashes.
Last question. Do you know if there will be continued upgrades soon to Memorial? I presume he means continued from 2001 or whenever the last time they did anything was, but that's the question.
You tell me, Chris. Are they going to add another chair down on the baseline on the bench, or you tell me?
Yeah, I mean, they might, if like the 3-point line is getting a little blurred or something, they might give that a paint job. Maybe dust off the front row. I in all seriousness, from what I heard, this was right after Turner left. This was right after the calendar turned over to March. I think they were working on about a $200 million campaign for different stuff. I think it would have included basketball, but the school is undefeated when it comes to getting in the way. So I would take the school versus improvements every time until I
Chris,
see
I'll
it.
say this too. Even if they had the best intentions all to go all the way through with it, it's a different world right now than it was.
Yeah, it is. That too. And
March
that's what makes
March
it.
the
Yeah.
9th or February the 9th. I mean, I think colleges and universities and, just not even looking at athletics and sports, they're really going to be taking a long look at budgets. I just couldn't see, no matter who it is. Like I said, I mentioned like the University of Alabama in football and even in just the arms race of facilities that you have in the SEC, I would have to think with the hit that universities are going to take across the board financially and just where, the economy is going to have to come back. And I just can't imagine them going through with some kind of just some type of big capital campaign to raise money because they're just going to put their facilities into a new space age. I just don't think that can happen right now conceivably.
Well, that's very important. I think anyway it was going to be difficult. I think development has been getting in their way again to some degree. I don't know all the details, but I know enough to know that was an issue. And I mean, I think now competition for dollars is just going to be more scarce. The next time that they give athletics a preferred seat at the table will be a first. So I think all those things put together. Now, the one thing I will say is I think that if you are making a case for Candace Storey-Lee, I think that university is very invested. Just read the press releases in having a female minority in that position. And so for that reason, this is me speaking hypothetically, I wonder if they might not be more inclined to do her some favors than they would other people to help her out because I think that's what they want in that spot. But I don't know that it'll matter.
Well, it may too. I mean, if people look at what's going on, it may take the pressure off. If you're saying, "Well, I thought we were going to do this and we were going to do that," and, she can always come back and say, "Well, no, we're not." But we can't do that right now, and I think people ought to understand that. But you also have to think too, this is not the way she wanted to. It's out of her control. This is not the way she wanted to start things out. When you're looking at a total shutdown of the school and finances and boosters and everything else and donors and that's not the way you want to get off and start out.
No, and I go back to her press conference. What at the time we were in the big run of the biggest, one of the biggest bull markets, combined with unemployment rates, maybe the biggest we've ever had. And even under that, I mean, and you can watch the video, she would not commit to anything other than that they were looking to raise money for a football locker project, which had been $6 to $7 million. And when she was asked about that, she said it would come in at under $5 million. So if those were the conditions then, I can only imagine what they could be now.
Right.
David, anything else that we did not get to tonight that is worth our discussion?
We did a bit of that.
David, I lost you a minute there, but I appreciate you coming on the show tonight.
Yeah.
Tell people where they can find you on Twitter and tell people the stories you are working on right now at VandySports.com.
Well, you can find me at Coach David Sisk on Twitter. If you've not followed me, please do that. We're going to be working quite a bit here, hoping to have an interview with Tyrin Lawrence coming up this week. He and I text sporadically, so I'm hoping he can find a little bit of time to do that. Going to try to find out more on William Jeffress. Hoping to get with his father in the next few days. So we're going to really try to have as much as possible in the 2020 recruiting class for the rest of this month.
You know, he is a couple of quality recruits, I think, from potentially putting themselves in a good spot 2 years from now. I don't have huge expectations for this fall. We don't know about McBride and where that's going, and even whether he would be eligible. I just don't think they have a lot of talent. Cleavon Brown would help. But, you know, you look at this and you say 2 years from now, Pippen's a junior, Harvey's a senior, Dessou's a junior, Millard Brown's a sophomore, Obena's a senior. You know, if McBride is in there and working out, maybe that's a huge boost to them. Again, we could see that going either way. But you can start to finally maybe see some seeds for some hope probably 2 seasons from now.
Yeah, and we'll wait and see what, Saban Lee does. I know from we hear some different things, but, if Saban Lee did happen to come back, I think this is a team next year challenge to, and I don't know, maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse, but if he comes back and some of these players, a DJ Harvey and a Cleavon Brown could contribute the way I hope they would, I think this is a team that could maybe push to go 500 in the SEC or at least, win 6 or 7 games. So, things are going to have to fall right. I mean, there's no doubt about that for next year. But, there's no doubt Rome wasn't built in a day, and this thing had gotten a bad shape, and it's not going to be built up overnight. But it looks to me like, it's starting to trend in the right direction.
Yeah, the Lawrence one to me was a big one, not just because they needed a player, but because, a lot of schools right now, I think the recruitment in the spring for those players gets a little disproportional. In other words, you're chasing a couple thousand players or a couple hundred who can really play at this level in the fall. At this point, you might be chasing a dozen nationally, and a lot of those kids are not coming your way because they're going to Kentucky or Kansas or somewhere like that. So the pool of guys that you can get at this stage that are potential difference makers is pretty small. I can't think of many that they've gotten. Jeff Taylor would be one, but I do think it seems to me, based on what we know, that this would be encouraging for that reason.
Yeah, and like I say, if they could get a Kerwin Walton, man, that would be just incredible. But like you say, it's if you go out and look at players right now that are unsigned, that are going to be difference makers that they could get in on, there's just not a lot of them out there.
No, and that's why I was discouraged for their chances after last fall. I thought, well, if Stute is all they got, they're going to be hard-pressed to find a difference maker in the spring, but give him credit, he did. And a long way to go before we know what to expect for next year. I don't think Saban Lee's coming back. I'd be very surprised, but it's not 100% impossible. The McBride matter we've gone over. If they can land a transfer or two, suddenly things are certainly looking up. And wherever this turns, David, you'll have us covered. I appreciate everything you do with the site. I appreciate you coming on this podcast. Be safe. Have a great Easter weekend. And again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the VandySports podcast. We appreciate you listening, and we'll have more episodes coming your way later next week.